Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Marcus Vargas, and guys, another packed show, as always. Today, I want to start things off talking about QBs. Yes, the most important position on the field, or, that's what a lot of people call it. You don't have to agree. I want to talk about QBs because I recently saw an interesting video. Emmanuel Acho was talking about the top quarterbacks in the NFL, and he made what you could say was a controversial statement that you're not taking Lamar Jackson over Pat Mahomes, Russell Wilson, or Deshaun Watson. But the reason I want to talk about this is that really is not that controversial of a statement. The point he makes is very, very clear and interesting. What he's saying is basically, other quarterbacks are better than Lamar Jackson because Lamar Jackson, what he's essentially saying, is a system quarterback. Now, yes, this is not, he clarifies, he's saying, I'm not knocking Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is a beast. He's great. He's wild, whatever. And just, this is not, he's not saying that he's a system quarterback like Tom Brady, right? But when you think about, and he actually never says Lamar Jackson is a system quarterback, but when the takeaway is Lamar Jackson is so great because he is on the Ravens, who have utilized everything around him to make the offense what it is where he flourishes. This is a very interesting point. Now, I've done my rankings. I've put Lamar Jackson in the, top tier of quarterbacks, but that is for fantasy football. When you look at it from, just a general football perspective, it is very interesting to think about. If you had to draft a team and start with a quarterback and not know who's going to be available, like, Acho asked this question as well, would you really take Lamar Jackson over Patrick Mahomes, even over Russell Wilson, or even over Deshaun Watson? Now, to give my opinion on the matter, I agree with him. I actually agree with him, as crazy as that may sound. The reason why I would never take Lamar Jackson over these guys is because of this. When I look at Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, I can see them on other teams being just as good, if not better than they already are. When I take Lamar Jackson out of the Ravens offense, without that offensive coordinator, without Harbaugh, without, the Heisman formation, without Ingram, without that crazy offensive line, I don't see Lamar Jackson being a top-tier quarterback. And so, yes, I think Lamar Jackson is one of the top QBs in the NFL, but I have to agree with Acho here and say he is not a top 3 quarterback. Maybe top 3 at most. I would give it to Mahomes. I would give it to Wilson. And then it's debatable after that who's 3, 4, 5. You can mix up any way you want. Deshaun, Lamar. Some people might throw Breeze in there. I know. Stans are going to throw Brady in there. But, the clear-cut number 1 quarterback in the NFL is Pat Mahomes. It is not Lamar Jackson. And, to be honest, guys, Lamar Jackson, while breaking all those records, has severely disappointed in the playoffs, has severely disappointed when it matters the most. And, that's what you're going to be remembered by. You know what I mean? You're going to be remembered. Of course, he's going to be remembered for, those crazy stats and breaking records. But at the end of it all, if he doesn't have, too much success, in the postseason, win a Super Bowl or two or more, he won't be on that, Mount Rushmore of the greatest QBs of all time. He'll be talked about, as one of the greats, right? But there's sort of a weird echelon, right, when we talk about the greatest QBs of all time, because there are, there are great QBs, and then there's sort of that other tier of where it's like this, like how people talk about Tom Brady, right? One of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But they don't talk about Drew Brees in that same manner, even though Drew Brees is an outstanding quarterback. He's a great quarterback. Actually, if you look at him, at the quarterback position, plays just as well, if not better than Tom Brady. All the crazy stats. And he's at, the height disadvantage, I guess you could call it, for him, defying the odds, had the injury, all this stuff. It's kind of interesting to think about what, people remember as your legacy and things like that. But anyway, regardless, yes, if I had to give you my rankings, I'm not including Lamar in even the top two. I really feel like right now it's going to be a very important and pivotal season for Lamar Jackson. I think a lot of people expect him to continue the dominance, but it's going to be very, very interesting. I wonder how people will feel if he's not putting up as insane numbers, if, the tricks, the gadget, formations, running the pistol all the time, if that doesn't work as much as it used to. Can Lamar Jackson adapt, not run as much, and become more of a throwing quarterback with success? Now, the reason why I say this, I'm not saying, he's going to just come out of here, out of that last season, that phenomenal season, and forget how to play quarterback. But, when Patrick Mahomes threw for 50 and 5K, did we realistically expect him to repeat those numbers, right? And then when, we saw the significant drop off of stats, we saw him get injured, a lot of people were counting him out. I'm not saying they're counting him out completely, saying he's not as good as he was, but, a lot of shows, a lot of experts pointed to the fact that, he's not, the 50 touchdowns, he's not near 5,000 yards down that pace. When you heard after last season, after Patrick Mahomes' first season as a starter, people just talked about he's going to slow down, he's going to slow down, he's going to slow down. But I'm not hearing this as much about Lamar Jackson, but I feel like I should be hearing it more about Lamar Jackson, because the way Lamar Jackson plays the game of football would make sense that it's going to slow down, progressively as he goes on in his career. We've seen it happen with tons of guys, Cam Newton, Russell Wilson, as, these recent players who, were more mobile when their careers started and are less and less mobile. The more punishment they take, the more hits they take, the more fragile their bodies become. So it's sort of interesting to me to think about how no one's talked about that as a, as much as they talked about, Pat Mahomes isn't repeating 50 and 5. But, it's going to be really, really hard for Lamar to repeat his insane, touchdown to interception ratio, the rushing yards, with his efficiency, it's pretty crazy. So I think we do need to be realistic when talking about Lamar Jackson, because, like I mentioned, as, and as Acho said, when you look at it, if we're really having a conversation about the best quarterbacks, he's not, Patrick Mahomes, he's not Russell Wilson. I know it sounds crazy to even say out of my mouth, Lamar Jackson took over the league last season. He, cover of Madden, MVP, all that. He's so young, changing culture in Baltimore, or I guess not changing culture, but sort of changing the life, because, now they are set to start, making Super Bowl runs. Joe Flacco went stale after a while. And so, it is very, very interesting, but I like I said, guys, I got to go with my man, Acho. I think he makes very, very valid points, but this is not to, say Lamar Jackson won't be the best quarterback for fantasy football. Let's be real here. Those stats that he's putting up on the ground, rushing touchdowns and all that, he's going to be great in fantasy football. But if you're talking about, like I said, if you had to rebuild your franchise, he's benefited a lot from the Ravens, going full force, giving their all into Lamar Jackson. And I would say, I mean, if you think about it like this, when you look at the Chiefs and Andy Reid's offense, he does a lot with what he has. He has the end arounds and the RPOs and the shovel passes and all that, playing with his speed and taking shots because he has this guy with a huge arm. But when you look at the Ravens offense, I don't think you'll find another offense in the NFL that feels so reliant on one person, right? It feels like no matter what they're doing, that offense runs through Lamar Jackson and is dependent on Lamar Jackson, right? Because you always feel like he will have the ball for the entire play. There's not one play I watch when I watch the Baltimore Ravens play where I actually am 100% convinced that Lamar Jackson is going to get rid of the ball. I think on every play, there is a possibility for Lamar Jackson to either tuck it and run, scramble out of the pocket and just go for it. And, on the play action, the handoffs, sometimes he's going to keep it, because they have those options. And so there's no other offense in the NFL like this offense. And I think, Lamar Jackson certainly has benefited greatly from that offense, from the offensive coordinator, from the commitment of that franchise to make him the centerpiece of the entire team, basically. That has made him sort of seem better than he is. And this is no disrespect. But we've seen what happens when that scheme breaks down. I mean, guys, if Lamar Jackson, is as good as Russ, is as good as Pat Mahomes, they should have won the Super Bowl. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious, right? It's just, if Lamar Jackson, with all that speed, man, I mean, this guy is insane. He stops on a dime, jukes. I mean, he looks like a running back out there. He looks like a super shifty, speedy running back. It's insane how he can move and wiggle. Give him those physical gifts, just the raw talent that he has, and then you give him the quarterback IQ and the passing talent. Why didn't he go win a Super Bowl? So we have to take those things into account. Yes, it's amazing what he's doing and amazing how he's changing the position. I do think it's actually cool, that the quarterback is, while sometimes I think it's, I don't know how effective it can be over time, over, many, many seasons, but I do think it's cool to look at the quarterback position as not just a guy who's going to sit in the pocket and throw it. I'm a big fan of mobile quarterbacks, one, because I think it takes a bit more, talent to be able to, sit in the pocket and throw the ball on the run. It's very, very hard to throw the ball while moving, especially when you're throwing it the opposite side of the field. But, when we last saw Lamar asked, to be that pocket passer, to sit tight and to throw that ball and get the team back into the game, he failed. 31 for 59, guys. 365 yards, 1 TD, and 3 turnovers. He had 2 picks and a fumble. Lamar Jackson, he struggles. I'm not going to say he struggles as a passer, but he struggles as a passer when it matters the most, right? We saw it against the Chargers last season. He did started to pick it up, but by then it was too late. Not last season, 2 seasons ago. And then last season against the Titans, he just fell apart. People can blame the time off, the rest, and, they got rusty, the momentum was shot. No, I don't think that's it. I think, he's not, used to it enough to, be asked to be that pocket passer and to sort of switch gears. Because if you look, 20 carries, 143 yards, super, super, super efficient on the ground, right? But sometimes you got to let that go, and that's not what wins you games, right? You got to be able to, always find a way to win the game. And I think, right now, of course, we might see it next season and Lamar Jackson evolve, but, as of last season, Lamar Jackson didn't always have that way to win the game. Therefore, not one of the league's best, but not one of the, not the top dog. So, very, very interesting, points that Emmanuel Acho brought up. I just wanted to talk about it and give my opinion on it because I thought it was something that a lot of people are really going to shoot down and a lot of people are going to see as a hot take, but I really didn't think it was that hot of a take. Honestly, it's like a lukewarm take. Maybe just kind of getting warm take. It's not that controversial. And I like when I see experts, make these, it's not just, riding the wave or making the most popular opinion or most popular take or the most common sense one, but actually looking at things under a microscope and saying, making a take that might not be the most popular. Of course, I'm not about just making crazy claims and saying, the Cleveland Browns are going to go 16-0 next season and the Ravens will go 8-8 and be horrible. That doesn't make any sense. But this one, very, very interesting. Especially very interesting to talk about a guy like that who won the MVP, is changing the league, changing the position and how we see it. Making the quarterback more of a weapon rather than just a passer. But he ain't overtaking my boy Mahomes. Sorry, guys. That's not just because I'm biased. You know what I mean? Experts agree. Of course I agree. Patrick Mahomes, Super Bowl winner, Super Bowl MVP. Lamar ain't touching him. Now, let me stop it there. But with that, guys, let's go into our first break of the day. And when we get back, some in other news. So stick around, guys. Enjoy the first break, and we'll be right back very, very soon.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. We are now in the second segment of today's show. And like I mentioned previously, the second segment of today's show will be in other news because there's a lot of little things going on that I want to touch on. Some interesting things. Of course, we're going to touch on Desean Jackson again because I think, there's still some things that need to be said about that. Actually, let's just start with that. So, before I get into, the punishment that Desean Jackson received, I want to, I want to talk about Malcolm Jenkins, his response to Desean Jackson's actions. And I want to talk about this because I'm a bit disappointed. Desean Jackson, like we know, like I've talked about already, made anti-Semitic Instagram posts, and, really bad reaction to it. He, quoted Hitler, of course. I did read that Snopes had debunked, the fact that the quotes weren't even Hitler's, which made it look, even, a little bit worse in my opinion, that, it wasn't even a real Hitler quote, and he quoted it anyway, and it said it was Hitler's quote. But Malcolm Jenkins posted a video, and to me, it felt wrong. Because, and the reason why I'm saying this is because Malcolm Jenkins, I'm going to be comparing, his reaction to this to his reaction to Drew Brees. When Drew Brees made insensitive comments about the flag, that, sort of were ignorant, misguided, Malcolm Jenkins put him through hell, Malcolm Jenkins, really, dragged him through the mud. He didn't really he didn't really drag him through the mud or his character, but he really came at him, told him basically, shut the F up. And, you got to learn to just be quiet or just take time. And it seemed very serious. His video, it felt very, opposing to Drew Brees and, saying, I can't stay quiet. I had a video that was way worse than this, et cetera, et cetera. We've known Malcolm Jenkins to be, a big voice in the NFL. in responding to Desean Jackson, the attitude of the video to me was just a bit too dismissive. And the reason why I want to say this is because, remember, last week I did say I want everyone to understand that, racism has no bias. And so I think we need to treat all, racism towards anyone the same. And, basically Malcolm Jenkins said in his video, guys, this is a distraction. We need to stay focused. He mentions Breonna Taylor's, the officers who killed her, that they're not arrested. We're still fighting for justice. We got a lot of work to do. This ain't it. Stay focused. He says, we can honor the Jewish heritage and trauma while staying focused on what matters. Jewish people aren't our problem. We aren't their problem. Let's not lose focus on what the problem truly is, and that's that Black lives still don't matter in this country. Honestly, it's a bit upsetting to hear how dismissive this is of the Desean Jackson issue. I really wish that he tackled this from a different angle, and I'm going to share my opinion on these things because they're important. That's just a side note. Not gonna not talk about these things just because it's not about fantasy football. Just want to make that clear. It feels, like I said, just very dismissive of what the real issue here with what the issue with Desean Jackson's statements were in his posts. And I really wish he would have tackled it from the angle of, hey, Desean Jackson, condemn him in his video, say, I do think he says, yes, they were wrong, but it's very, very subtle and dismissive of the, prejudices that Jewish people face in this country as well. And I wish it would have been more, acknowledging the fact that, yes, other people also suffer with these prejudices. It would have made more sense to say, Desean Jackson, I condemn you for what you said. You made these mistakes. You need to work to fix it, as he did with Drew Brees. And then after say, now let's, keep fighting for equality and, keep, stay on track and keep focused because Breonna Taylor's killed. But to me, this felt very like, let's not pay attention to this, guys, because, we've been doing, all these protests and peaceful protests and riots, et cetera, et cetera. The riots, there were riots that did occur. All this stuff that's been going on. Let's focus on this. This is not important right now. That's just how it felt. And so I wish Malcolm Jenkins tackled it a little bit better. And, it is what it is. But it's just not a good look for Malcolm Jenkins. Either way, yes, I'm glad he at least said something, against Desean Jackson and didn't just stay quiet because he is such a big voice. But for, a guy who usually has a big voice, this felt a little bit quiet. Okay. Now I want to talk about the punishment that Desean Jackson received because I think that one's also a bit interesting. Desean Jackson was fined for detrimental conduct, after these posts, which I don't care about. I don't care about fines because, these guys are very wealthy. These guys make a lot of money to play the game of football. But what I did like about the punishment was that, the Eagles have basically said that for Desean Jackson to basically stay on the team, he definitely needs to take action. Take action to show that he, understands what he did was wrong, and basically it was a call to action. And that's what I really liked because a lot of times, when we're punishing, or when the NFL, not we, right? When the NFL, when they punish players, just finding them money, I don't know if that really solves anything. And I want to read what the Eagles did say. They said, "We are disappointed, and we reiterated to Desean the importance of not only apologizing, but also using his platform to take action to promote unity, equality, and respect. We are continuing to evaluate the circumstances and will take appropriate actions. We take these matters very seriously and are committed to continuing to have productive and meaningful conversations with Desean, as well as all of our players and staff, in order to educate, learn, and grow." That was, one of the initial statements. I like that it wasn't just a fine and whatever. I want to see action. I'm glad that the franchise wants to see action, and they should. They should want to see that their players have changed. And after, the Riley Cooper incident, they certainly need to send a message, because the Riley Cooper incident was one where it wasn't handled well enough, and the punishment was not severe enough. So glad that they're, punishing him. He deserves it, plain and simple. And hopefully, the franchise and him can move forward to be, for him, he can move forward to be better, more aware, more open-minded and thoughtful before, posting or saying things. All right, next article, next news tidbit. An NFL coach accuses Odell Beckham Jr. of quitting on the Cleveland Browns and the Giants. This is very, very interesting because Odell Beckham Jr., one of the most, interesting figures in the league, very, very polarizing. A lot of people call him a diva. A lot of people also call him one of the best receivers in the NFL. Well, maybe not recently, but have called him one of the best, or if not the best, receiver in the NFL. I know people have certainly said he's the most talented. Now, it's very, very interesting because, out of all the arguments you do hear, he's a diva, he needs attention, bad for a locker room. You don't hear too often that he quits on his team, but I think it's very, very interesting to think about. And there was also an NFL player cited in this. It was anonymous player, but that said, wherever Odell Beckham has been, the team is not successful, which I think is very, very interesting because, when you look at, there are teams with just a receiver, that have success, right? A lot of times, of course, a team that only just has, the receiver, or when the receiver is the best player, there are teams that are successful. That's what I should say. All right. We see, when you look at the Atlanta Falcons, yes, they haven't had as much success, but when they went to the Super Bowl, Julio Jones was their only receiver, basically, right? Julio Jones is an absolute monster. And yes, they had Devontae Freeman, who was playing well at the time, Matt Ryan, MVP. But, when I look at a receiver like DeAndre Hopkins, when I look at a receiver like Julio Jones, when I look at receivers like Devontae Adams, yes, of course, these guys are playing with good quarterbacks. But Odell Beckham seems to, yes, he is so very talented, but he sort of feels toxic at this point. It feels like right now, unless, he's, undergoing some sort of resurrection or, reincarnation, that basically he just can't seem to find somewhere where he can stay humbled and focused on, the task at hand, which is winning and eventually going to and winning a Super Bowl. It seems like, Odell Beckham, he loves the fame. He loves the star power that he has, the cameras that he attracts. And, he's talked about himself as being, the most scrutinized player in the NFL. But I wouldn't say he's the most scrutinized. He likes the attention. And I think he brings the attention onto himself. But then at the same time, doesn't like it when all that attention brings criticism. Odell Beckham is very, very, interesting figure. And of course, I just want to talk on these comments. I'm not, claiming Odell's quit on his teams. But I think it's something to think about. It's something very interesting to think about, and to see the dip in production that we've seen. Of course, that has to do with injuries. I think he broke his ankle a few years ago. I'm not sure what exact bone, but I know, he missed that whole season breaking his foot or ankle. He apparently wasn't fully healthy last season, but we can't really go in to game film, say, oh, he quit on this play unless it's blatantly obvious, right? And so, but it's something interesting to think about. I've talked about Odell as a guy I think is going to bounce back, a guy I think is going to be fantasy relevant next season. But if these things are to be believed, that should tamper your expectations, right? That would definitely be a little bit of a concern when drafting him in your fantasy football leagues. You don't want guys who quit. For anyone who had Amari Cooper, whenever he was on the road, he seemingly quit on you. That doesn't win you fantasy football games. That doesn't win you, your fantasy football Super Bowls. So it's definitely something to think about. But Odell Beckham, I just wanted to, give my opinion on that little tidbit of information that has been released. Odell Beckham, though, still, has the potential to, reassert his dominance at the wide receiver position. I don't think he's one of the top guys right now, for whatever reason that may be. Whether it's Baker Mayfield having troubles in his second season or his injury problems, we have yet to see. Well, we'll see next season when Odell's finally healthy, when Baker Mayfield has learned from his mistakes and has made a commitment to get better. Apparently, then we're gonna see the best version, I think, of Odell and Baker next season, where we can really judge. I think this season was sort of, putting your toe in the water, seeing how it feels. But next season, we're jumping in. We're diving in the deep end, seeing if we like this pool, if we're not afraid of the deep waters. That's why I think people should definitely be drafting Odell Beckham. And even if you want to stash Baker Mayfield, I think that would be a very, very interesting pickup as well, because, it wouldn't hurt to waste a late round pick on Baker. Of course, you're going to be picking up Odell sooner than Baker, but, they could pop off next season and you could be rewarded very, very handsomely with a fantasy football Super Bowl championship. But with that, guys, I want to end the In Other News segment here. Of course, there's other stories, to touch on, but, that's what we're doing today. Enjoy the break while you have it. It doesn't last very, very long. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles, my hometown team. I mean, not my team. I'm a Chiefs fan, but I live in Philadelphia. Philadelphia Eagles, clearly the pride, one of the prides of this city. But yeah, stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back after the break with Eagles Talk.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Alrighty, guys, welcome back. We move on with the Eagles. Yes, them birds. Fly, Eagles, fly. Those pesky, pesky birds. Okay, I want to talk about the Eagles because there's a lot of interesting murmurings, coming out of Philly recently. Very, very recently, actually, as of this recording. But, Brian Baldinger has reported that he's hearing whispers about big news coming this week for the Philadelphia Eagles. He says #birds could get a lot better in mid-July. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is because there are big names on the market. Now, Eagles Wire, which is, the Eagles affiliated website, sports coverage, they posted 6 possible moves that the Eagles could make, regarding this news. Now, I want to comment on these because, in my opinion, if we're talking about big news, we're talking about big name or big, transaction. Now, at number 1, they have Jadeveon Clowney coming to the team, betting on himself for 1 season. That would be pretty big. Clowney's been a free agent for quite some time now, not receiving the market that he thought he would. But, like it says here, with Clowney, Brandon Graham, Javon Hargrave, Fletcher Cox, that'd be pretty insane. That'd be, very, very good for their pass rush. Excuse me. And, just big for Philly in general. This right here is one that I think is pretty likely. Because, when we talked about Jadeveon Clowney before, a while back when free agency just had first started, the Eagles were, a potential landing spot, and Jadeveon Clowney wants to play for a winning team. He doesn't want to go to some scrub team or a team with a losing record. He wants to go play for a team that he thinks can go win it all. The Eagles certainly have pieces in place and the potential to do so, and he could certainly help them take it all. So that is very, very interesting. Now, on this very same site at number 2, they have Jason Peters returns for one last ride. That is not going to be the big news. There's no way that the big news being rumored out of Philly is Jason Peters returning. He is ancient. He needs to hang him up. They want to proceed with Andre Dillard, drafted him for a reason. I don't think that this is the news. Don't expect that. They mentioned Logan Ryan joining the Eagles. Now, this would be a good signing, but I don't think this is big news. I don't think this is huge for the Eagles. Logan Ryan hasn't had this huge market. And so I think, for it to be big news, this is going to need to be something, either Jadeveon Clowney, who's a big name, he was asking for way too much money, or making a big trade. Number 4 here, they have LaShawn McCoy. And then they say, see Jason Peters. There's no way this is the big news either. That would be cool news. It'd be cool to see LaShawn Jackson go back to the Eagles, but to say that is big news is kind of a joke. We saw, LaShawn McCoy, Andy Reid try to revive whatever was left of LaShawn McCoy, and he really didn't do much for the Chiefs. He was sort of efficient during the regular season, but after that, they basically shut him down for the playoffs, and he didn't contribute at all in the Super Bowl. He didn't even play. Okay. Number 5 here, which I think should have been above the last I just read, basically. The Eagles land Devontae Freeman to complement Miles Sanders. That would be a very, very interesting addition, but I would hate it. I would hate it because then, we are seeing the same old story that we have out of Philadelphia all the time. They're probably going to, run some sort of committee, and Devontae Freeman is constantly going to be taking snaps from Miles Sanders. That would suck. So no, I do not want this to happen. This is not going to happen. I'm not even going to put it into the universe that this is a possibility. The Eagles will not land Devontae Freeman to complement Miles Sanders, and I really, really hope I'm not jinxing myself here. And then, I'm going to have to, look like a fool. But number 6 here, they have Larry Warford signed to add even more depth to the Eagles' offensive line. Again, solid move, not big news. So they really missed the mark here. I want to tell you what would be big news and what I think is actually possible. The Eagles trading for Jamal Adams. Now, that would be really surprising, right? We know the kind of money Jamal Adams wants and how much it's going to cost the team to trade for him. But, that's big. That's big news. Adding LaShawn McCoy is not big news. So I'm thinking as big as possible here. And I'm going to say that, honestly, the thing that I think it's most likely is that Jadeveon Clowney is going to sign with the Eagles for, much cheaper deal than people had previously thought. He's going to try and prove himself and get a huge deal or, franchise tag, whatever that may be. Or possibly they're going to add Everson Griffin. I know Everson Griffin is getting up there in the age department, but he has been very, very efficient for the Minnesota Vikings, while playing there. So it's either going to be one of those 3 things. While I don't think it's going to be the Jamal Adams thing, I think, Jadeveon Clowney, Everson Griffin, that's possible. But to say something is big, and I'm not saying, we should take Brian Baldinger's words are always true and, he's 100% right. But, when I'm thinking of something big, I'm not thinking about adding guys for depth or, guys who are well out of their prime and are on the verge of retiring. Unless those people are all-time greats, right? Unless, Tom Brady is, sort of nearing the end of his career, or so we think. Adding him, when he's about to retire, that's a bit different than adding, LaShawn McCoy, right? So, to move on from that, I want to talk about the interesting possibility of Desean Jackson not being with the Eagles next season because, like I mentioned previously, the Eagles, yes, they find him or whatever, but they did mention that, if they don't see, an effort for Desean Jackson to change and use his platform to make change or to help create change, basically, that's what he has to do to stay on the team. They won't keep him on the team. So, should something happen or him not make the proper effort that the Eagles want to see to change, or to show that, he is a passionate and not a racist individual, the Eagles could be losing one of the best deep threats in the league. and that would be interesting for fantasy football's sake. Now, the Eagles did get Marquise Goodwin. I do want to remind everyone of that. So losing Desean Jackson really isn't that big of a blow. I'm not saying Marquise Goodwin is Desean Jackson, but Marquise Goodwin can do some of those things that Desean Jackson does for the team, right? And of course, Marquise Goodwin needs to stay healthy. But we just saw Desean Jackson injured as of late, and the Eagles made the playoffs without him. I'm sure they could do just fine without him and, plugging in this kid, Jalen Reagor. And I think at this point in time, I would never wish, I'm not going to sit here and say, I just want the Eagles to cut Desean Jackson to get it over with. But one, he did do something pretty terrible, and I think it actually would benefit, guys like Jalen Reagor on that team to get significant fantasy boosts. But should Desean Jackson leave the team, guys, that's not going to be something that is severely impacting the fantasy football value of the Eagles offense. I really don't think he's that integral of a piece. We saw him for little tiny spurts. I think it was he might have played in three games last season. And while he was there, yes, it was, he had some electrifying plays, but without him, Carson Wentz still managed to be a top 10 quarterback. While, the Eagles did not draft the touted Justin Jefferson like many thought they would, but they did draft a wide receiver that they believe in, a young guy with some speed. Yes, he had drop concerns, but a guy that they think can get the job done for them. So don't be too concerned about the Eagles dropping Desean Jackson unless you are an Eagles fan. You just love you some Desean Jackson. Had the ties to the Eagles before. I really wouldn't be too concerned from a football or a fantasy football standpoint. The Eagles, just to tie it back into, the supposed big move that they're going to make, I really want to see them get back to their winning ways. If they do make a big move, I'm going to go ahead and put them over the Cowboys. I have a move that's actually big, not one of those, add LaShawn McCoys. I think, they become a team that's hungry, that clearly wants to win now. Because that's basically what that's going to signify, right? That they're not trying to enter a slow phase of a, sort of rebuilding a team, letting go of the older guys and starting new at integral pieces. They're saying, yes, we're getting rid of these guys. Malcolm Jenkins is gone, Jason Peters. But they still want to be that sort of win now team. And that's what that would tell me. I think as of right now, the Eagles have just a bit more grit than the Dallas Cowboys, with the whole underdog story, the whole underdog thing. Remember, they were in the masks during that Super Bowl run. They're gritty. The city that they represent is gritty. Literally, the mascot for the hockey team of that city's name is Gritty. So, you get it, right? And so I would love to see the Eagles turn this around because I think they're an offense that can be very, very potent. One that's very interesting for fantasy football because their quarterback is solid. I think the running back is going to be very, very solid with RB1 potential. And who knows what this Jalen Reagor kid becomes, but, he could be an interesting wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 type of option as well. Because I know that they want to get him involved, right? I think, like I said, since the Eagles are a team that, they want to keep winning, they're so recently removed from the Super Bowl, they want to get back there. They're not just drafting guys to have a slow rebuild. They want guys that can make an impact right now. So the Eagles are a team, I've talked about on the show here, teams that, you should be paying attention to based on their offense or fantasy football. The Eagles are one of those teams, and I feel like, that's my bad. I don't think I mentioned the Philadelphia Eagles as one of those offenses that is very, very interesting for fantasy football. The quarterback, Carson Wentz. The running back, Miles Sanders. Yes, the receiving core is a bit muddied, and Alshon has been hurt, but Alshon at his best can be, he can contribute a lot. But the tight ends, they have two of the best tight ends in fantasy football on one team. So I think that contributes for the lack of the top receiver that they have. Having two guys at a very, very scarce position be top 10 at that position is huge. And so, they're a team that to me can be, one of those kind of close your eyes and pick and you have a solid player for fantasy football. Of course, not really at the wide receiver position, but at the other positions, yes. One other thing that I want to talk about too is, if they add Jadeveon Clowney, I think the Eagles are due for a good defensive season for fantasy football or, regarding fantasy football because, not too long ago, they were one of fantasy football's top defenses. Of course, we've seen that the Eagles, the secondary had some woes along the way. But during their Super Bowl run, they were a very, very good defense. Now, unfortunately, they're not even, kind of close to the top 10. But I think, with that staff, and with the players that they could have, if they add to Davion Clowney, they just added Darius Slay. And forgive me for blanking on the other corner that they added. Man, how am I blanking on this corner? Forgive me. But they could be they could be due for a big boost in fantasy football rankings. And while we're on the topic of defenses, for fantasy football, I do want to remind you guys that special teams do play an interesting factor in the defensive rankings of these fantasy football teams. It's not just about how they can hold teams from scoring. It's about if they get big returns and touchdowns on kickoffs, punts, if they can block punts, if they can block field goals, things like that. So keep those things in mind when you're looking for a solid fantasy football defense and special teams. That's one of the reasons the Chiefs have even, tried to stay close to the top 10 because they have some pretty dynamic playmakers on the special teams units. But it's definitely something to think about. I think people forget about, certainly. I mean, the Pats were blocking punts left and right last season, and, that contributes to points. So something to think about. It's not just about, what they do when they're on defense. Getting a touchdown, that's a big 6 points for your defense. Should they get a punt or kickoff return. So, with that, guys, we're going into our last break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about some wide receiver rankings that recently came out on ESPN+. So, stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back after this short break.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Final segment of today's show, and for the last segment, like I said, I want to go over an article recently published on ESPN Plus having to do with wide receiver rankings. And I want to do this because I'm just, spoiler alert, my boy finally got some recognition. Okay, so ESPN Plus has been posting articles, very interesting. Basically, they asked more than 50 league executives, coaches, scouts, players, etc. To help vote on the top 10 players at 11 different positions. And basically, here was the results of that poll for the wide receiver position. I think this is super, super interesting, which is why I want to talk about it. Definitely a bit surprising. So check it. Actually, I'll go from 10 down. I don't want to go number 1 first. That's not as fun. Very, very interesting. Number 10 is even interesting. Amari Cooper of the Dallas Cowboys. His highest ranking was number 5. Someone had him as a top 5 receiver, and his lowest ranking was not even on the ballot. They talk about him here as the most polarizing player on this list by a wide margin. He took heat from several voters because of what he should be. One coordinator said Cooper is top 10 in his sleep with effortless ability, which is the problem. He's 10th, but should be 5th. Very, very interesting. I kind of agree with this. If Amari Cooper showed up in every single one of his games, he would be an absolute beast, right? But as we saw last season, he doesn't show up on the road. With the Raiders, he had problems with drops. didn't have that, as much of a problem with the Cowboys, if at all. And he's certainly, his route running, yes, one of the best in the league. Very, very good wide receiver, but has problems showing up on the road. I like this here. He's gonna be one of, he's going to be a solid pickup for fantasy football next season as well. I think he'll repeat his success. Number 9, Chris Godwin, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I don't mind this here, but when you see where Mike Evans is, you might. Okay, Godwin not only exploded with 1,333 yards and 9 touchdowns in his third season, but he earned Pro Football Focus's top receiver grade. So very, very interesting. PFF has him as the top receiver, but coaches, execs, players, etc., they don't see him, as a top dog, which is very, very interesting. I think, it's understandable because it was his first big breakout season. You want to see more proof, but an NFC executive said if you're not convinced now, you will be by the end of the year. Mike Evans is probably more talented, but Godwin does everything well and has tremendous hands. Very interesting. I like this here. Chris Godwin is certainly a top 10 wide receiver right now. Number 8, Keenan Allen, Los Angeles Chargers. I love this. Allen isn't a household name with every fan, but he is inside NFL offices. Keenan Allen is one of the most underrated and underappreciated wide receivers in the NFL. His highest ranking was number 2. His lowest was number 10. I should mention, Chris Godwin's highest ranking was 4. His lowest was off of the ballot completely. Keenan Allen, is certainly one of the top receivers in the league. He's not known, the biggest knock, and they say here, he's not considered a true outside receiver by many, but the Chargers would dispute that, believing he has enough speed and can turn in and out of breaks with great feel inside and out. Yes, now that's true. Keenan Allen's not he's not a burner. He doesn't have the best speed, but he is one of the game's best route runners. He makes up for what he lacks, in speed with his route running and technique and ability to get open and get separation. Keenan Allen is very underappreciated. Number 7, Devontae Adams, Green Bay Packers. His highest ranking was someone was absolutely part of the Packers staff because they had him at number 1. His lowest ranking was number 12. Adams lost a tight race to... Oh, okay, I can't spoil it here. But Devontae Adams, very, very good wide receiver. This is actually low for him. I think he should be above at least one of the guys that I'm about to mention up here. Right now, he struggled with some injuries last season, but being the only receiver on that Green Bay Packers team, he is an absolute stud. Now, he does have Aaron Rodgers throwing to him, which certainly helps him. But I mean, did you see? Who was it? Chad Ochocinco, was it? Crying at his route running. I mean, it's pretty. If that's not a tell to how good this guy is, how clean he is, and how he gets separation at the line, then I don't know what is. Now to move on, number 6, Mike Evans. He's way above his teammate Chris Godwin. A lot of people think Chris Godwin is better. They certainly do for fantasy football's sake, and they think, I guess, he will be better. But highest ranking number 1, to me, it's a bit absurd as well. Lowest ranking number 12, just like Devontae Adams. Mike Evans, I will say here and now, is also one of those guys who is underappreciated, not talked about enough. He's always been one of the top guys in the NFL, but he didn't get enough recognition. And he's talked about that. I remember seeing interviews with him where he says, I'm not considered one of the NFL's elite guys. I don't know why. I played at that level. I feel like I'm an elite guy. I'll change everyone's minds, basically. Excuse me. I hope Brady can drive the ball downfield, because Mike Evans is so good with the deep ball. And I want him to, stay relevant and not sort of fall into the, not into the trap, I should say, but, fall victim to Brady not being able to throw deep or throwing, the intermediate stuff, constantly throwing to Godwin, Gronk, and stuff like that. But Mike Evans is certainly uber talented. And I agree with what the one exec said about Chris Godwin, where he said, Mike Evans is more talented overall. Number 5. I agree with this. I've said it all the time. Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. If you do not agree, then I don't know what to tell you, but he is. people think he's only speed, but he's not. His speed is certainly a gift. It certainly helps him, but is John Ross one of the top receivers in the NFL? I didn't think so, right? He knows how to get into space. He knows how to find holes in zones. He knows what to do. He knows how to run routes. And also, he has the hops to go up and get a ball and moss people. I don't know if you guys remember just last season, his first game back from the shoulder injury, getting up there on the free play, a shot downfield that Patrick Mahomes took. He gets over and mosses two people, jumps over them, gets the ball down, stretches for the goal line. So he knows where to go, knows where to stop, knows where to cut. And I think, he is certainly one of the NFL's top receivers. He's a wide receiver one. He's an elite guy. Certainly a guy who I think is underappreciated. He's not talked about enough. Of course, the Chiefs Kingdom, Chiefs fans, we talk about him all the time. But it seems like, when experts are talking about top receivers in the NFL, his name doesn't get mentioned nearly enough. Number 4 here is a bit absurd. Odell Beckham Jr. If you pushed everyone else on this list up one and you made Odell Beckham Jr. number 10, I think that I would be satisfied with that right now, because we're talking about right now. The top 10 receivers in the NFL right now, it's not Odell Beckham Jr. I'm just sorry. He hasn't had a good enough, of a season in recent enough memory for me to say that right now Odell Beckham is the number 4 receiver in the NFL. That to me just seems a bit absurd. Someone ranked him as number 1. His lowest ranking was number 10. Tyreek Hill's ranking highest was 3. His lowest was 11. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Odell's been plagued by injury. He's been plagued by shoddy quarterback play. But to say that right now he is number 4, you'd be basing it on, his good seasons with the Giants and the potential that he has. And I'm sorry for me to say that, Odell Beckham Jr., based on potential after 2 bad seasons, well, not bad, right? They weren't horrible. But to say he's number 4, to me is a bit high. He is amazing running after the catch. He can run all kinds of routes. He's good with the deep ball. He's very, very good. And he's a very complete receiver. But talking about right now and what he's done recently, he hasn't shown us that OBJ, right? So as of right now, he's not that OBJ. But I understand why he's number 4 and why people voted him so high. This is where it gets very, very interesting. Number 3, DeAndre Hopkins. He's out of the top 2. I consider DeAndre Hopkins one of the top 2 receivers in the NFL. It's very, very hard to pick when you get to these top 3, though. Not too long ago, DeAndre Hopkins didn't drop a single pass. Absolute monster, crazy hands, and there was passes that he was literally like upside down catching it through his legs one play, and I'm pretty sure it was a play that got called back for penalty 2 seasons ago that he still caught. Like other guys on this list, he's not a guy with burner speed who's just going to leave people in the dust, but his technique, his route running, his hands are amazing. He has arguably the best hands in the NFL. And I know people think Michael Thomas as well, but DeAndre Hopkins he's a beast, man. I like this here, and I think he's going to do wonders for the Arizona Cardinals. Number 2, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Michael Thomas. So he is not number 1. If you haven't guessed it already, the number 1 receiver in the NFL, as voted on by executives, coaches, players, Julio Jones, Atlanta Falcons. Oh, I will say, DeAndre's highest ranking was 1. His lowest was 6. Michael Thomas' highest ranking 1, lowest 6. Now, Michael Thomas is a beast. I don't understand how Michael Thomas, how he can get open so often, being basically the only weapon that the Saints have. I really don't understand how a man can break the record for catches when that is the guy they're going to every game, almost every pass. It's interesting to see, that he's number 2. I actually expected him to be number 1 on this list because of what he did last season and how, a guy who's not beating you deep, not super fast, can rack up so many yards and fight for yards and be so tough. He didn't get number 1, but interesting. And I don't have too many qualms with it. Number 1, Julio Jones. Julio Jones is a freak of nature. I think when anyone talks about the top 3 wide receivers in the NFL, they mention Julio Jones, and he should be mentioned as one of the top 3. An NFL coordinator has said he's an avatar. There's only one of him. They also mentioned the expectation entering the voting. This is, part of the article, not that coordinator. The expectation entering the voting was this would be close between Jones, Michael Thomas, and DeAndre Hopkins. It wasn't. More than half the voters selected Jones as number 1 overall. I mean, that speaks for itself. Interestingly enough, his lowest ranking was 7, which is lower than Michael Thomas and DeAndre, but clearly his highest ranking was 1. He got 1 at 31 years old. What Julio Jones can do, what he's been doing for his entire career is absolutely phenomenal. And when you talk about his game, they mention this here. The only thing you can say about him is that he's getting old. He is he is absolutely phenomenal. Can go up there and get those tight window passes, get those contested catches. I remember, I think it was last or 2 seasons ago, they were getting spanked by the Patriots, but there was a play in back of the end zone. I believe it was a fade. He just goes up there and rips the ball out of a Patriots corner's hands, scores a touchdown. You guys saw what he was doing in that Super Bowl. My goodness, man. He is just, yes. I agree with this here. Julio Jones is absolutely phenomenal. Like the coordinator said, there's only one of him. And they say here, a few cornerbacks said they'd rather play Jones than, say, a shake at the line guy like Hill or Devontae Adams. One coordinator said Jones is amazing, but only for 60% of snaps. Very interesting. He can still get the DBs to turn their hips better than anyone, one longtime NFL assistant said. But is he approaching the end? And like I said, that's about the only knock you can give to Julio Jones, because he's been on a team where for a while he is the guy. He is the best guy by far on the offense, and sort of putting the load on his shoulders and just sort of carrying that offense. So very, very interesting stuff. Definitely agree with this. This wouldn't be my rankings for fantasy football, obviously. Certainly not going to be putting Odell Beckham above guys like Tyreek, even Mike Evans, Devontae, Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin. All those guys are going to score more fantasy football points next season, I think, than Odell. Maybe not Mike Evans, but yeah. But very, very interesting. I have to say I agree with most of this list. Odell Beckham's ranked entirely too high, but would love to know what you guys think. Certainly let me know in comments on Twitter. With that, guys, we are going to end the show for today. I want to thank you for listening to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I want to ask that you follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at GSMC_F Football. That would be much appreciated. Leave a comment, leave a rating, leave a 5-star rating if you like, and let us know what you love. Let us know what you hate. But of course, keep it constructive and respectful, because that helps us get better, not only for us, but also for you, because, you guys are who we do this for. We appreciate anyone listening. And I want to say, too, make sure you're still staying safe. Make sure you're still wearing masks when you go out. Make sure you're taking the necessary precautions to help stop the spread of the coronavirus, COVID-19. Stay healthy out there. Stay safe, guys. And be responsible. Thank you for listening to the show, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.